So, as Dean Lennox already mentioned, I mean, I think most people are probably aware, we live in an urban world. I mean, the vast majority of people live in cities, what we call cities, depending on exact definitions. It's about 66-70% of people on the planet live in what we think of as cities, and that number is growing. There's more people are moving to cities. Cities are growing themselves. There's new master plan cities. There's hundreds of new cities being built. So this sort of trend towards an urban world is continuing and is a strong trend. And there's always been, for hundreds of years, there's been this tension between urbanization and city building and the environment and sustainability questions. And it's always, even if you think back to the sort of beginning of the sort of urban planning profession, is really about getting people out of cities. If you think about the garden city movement and these kind of things, it was kind of acknowledging that cities are dirty and polluting and dangerous and not safe places to be. And so a lot of the sort of first movements to improve, human health and well-being, even if those terms weren't necessarily used, was getting people into more sort of into out in rural areas or more sort of green spaces. And we've seen some very bad impacts in terms of urban sprawl and car dependency, automobile dependency, which has all kinds of environmental and health impacts. And then there's also this movement more recently to kind of embrace this idea that cities actually have the answers, have a lot of sustainability and environmental answers to say they're places where people can live, can develop vibrant, inclusive neighborhoods where people can not depend on cars. They can use active transportation and public transit, for example. And also thinking about just the infrastructure, it's a lot more economic to build fewer roads and fewer power lines, all these kind of things at higher densities. But there's a lot of these kind of trade-offs between what urban sustainability is. And when we came together as a group, we really tried to think about what is urban sustainability, how are we going to define it, how are we going to move forward with this sort of definition or conception. And you can see some of these keywords on the slide here. We're really thinking about this idea of livability, really thinking about these ideas around disparities in terms of we can imagine these types of neighborhoods that are vibrant and safe and good to walk and cycle. They're inclusive of newcomers to the city, but those places are very clearly not available to everyone in terms of there's affordability issues, there's issues around a lack of housing, and so we're really interested in those disparities and how to overcome them in order to have a real sustainability. What kind of cities do we want to sustain that that have these kind of qualities that we want, and that have maximized economic, social, and environmental benefits. And so, as Dean Lennox mentioned a few minutes ago, we were basically kind of thrown together, happily thrown together. We never worked together, but we very quickly saw a lot of synergies around what we're in. David's background, in the School of Urban Planning, and you have a lot of expertise in housing issues and short-term rentals and sort of urban governance, sort of writ large. And Andy with expertise in biodiversity and kind of nature in cities is something he's been thinking about for decades. In terms of how we can sort of maximize nature in cities. And my background as an urban planner and looking at urban transport planning and thinking about the sort of the social, environmental, and economic impacts of infrastructure and policy around transport. And so we came together and came up with this sort of vision, which guided us right from the beginning, to develop an integrative program of research on urban sustainability that will generate and mobilize the knowledge required to make cities more socially inclusive and less environmentally impactful while improving the well-being of residents. And so that sort of guided our whole vision and how we sort of developed this idea of this sort of dashboard or urban explorer, which you're going to get to see in a few minutes. And quickly before we move on, so there's a lot of these kind of city dashboard. A lot of cities around the world are developing these kinds of things, and we tried to do something that's a little bit different. And one thing we noticed is many of these are kind of sort of narrowly focused, and also don't they might just focus on a few different indicators. And also, while there's some chance for interaction, sort of user guided interfaces, it's quite limited. So one of the things we want to do is really make sure the sort of user experience was a really good one, and there's lots of opportunities to sort of choose what you want to explore, and there's room for interaction with all these maps, and again that you're going to see in just a few minutes. And also, in terms of, again, as Bruce mentioned, we live in a time of data. So there's big data. There's all kinds of things out there, and we didn't want to focus so much on the sort of data for the sake of that, but think about, its meaning, think about its making it accessible to all users. And so what you're seeing on this slide here is making sure that it's accessible not only in the sense of being on a free website, but the analysis, what you see is understandable, it's intuitive to use, it can be used by a wide variety of different people. And so what we came up with is SUS, which again, you're going to see in a couple of minutes. I'm really excited to show it off here. But the idea is this is something that allows people in Montreal, and again, whether you're, a resident of, of a neighborhood, whether you're a student or whether you're the mayor, or, whether you're a person making a decision about where to build a new transport line or, whether to build, new condos or housing, you can find answers to some of these questions, here. And so we want it to be a program, to harness this data and to answer questions. You can ask questions and get some answers through what you're going to see. So it's both a data exploration and a sort of knowledge information sharing platform. So the idea is we're hoping it will stimulate new research and help prioritize action, things that actually can change for the better, and support action for adaptation. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to David, who's going to, as I say, is going to talk more about some of the nitty-gritty details of how we all did this. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, I'm very excited after several years of hard work on this platform to be finally kind of undoing the ribbon and letting everybody see what's inside. What I want to do before I give you a demonstration of SUS in action is explain a little bit some of the challenges we were trying to tackle and kind of how we tackled those challenges. And I think to some extent, like the real motivation here was the question of how, knowing that urban sustainability is this inherently complex, multidisciplinary, multidimensional phenomenon, how can we adequately reckon with the complexity, with the multidimensionality, by gathering up as large as possible a range of data sources speaking to sustainability questions in the Montreal region, and allow for an exploration of these data sources, which is simultaneously super deep, super dynamic, but also really intuitive. So, something we've kind of told ourselves is maybe we need PhDs to build this, but you shouldn't need a PhD to use it, right? But having kind of both sides of that coin, that it's something where you can just kind of start clicking away and exploring things and it will feel easy, but that also there's a lot of depth under the surface that's kind of available for you. That's been a really key challenge for us. And, kind of reflecting on some of the specific, things which go into that challenge. There's one issue which I think academic researchers are well familiar with doing research projects, which is about the heterogeneity or the kind of all the variety of different data sources. So, just as some simple examples, some data types are qualitative. Sometimes we've got raw counts. Sometimes they're kind of percentages or ratios. Sometimes they come from public sources with very high quality metadata. Sometimes they're private. Sometimes they're crowdsourced, and we don't really know. Sometimes they're generated by machines, and we have to kind of trust that the computers are doing a good job. These are all issues where, for a given research project, for a given paper, we know how to handle this, but handling these issues in general. So not just that we've got one particular analysis of a few different variables and we know how to clean up that data and make it intersect properly. That's easy. How do we design a system that can do this for any number of variables, from any different kinds of data sources in an extremely flexible way? It's the same issue when it comes to questions of spatial and temporal scale. So if we think about, for example, the really high quality data we get from Statistics Canada in the census, it tends to be enumerated, at a whole set of different kind of nesting scales: municipalities, census tracts, dissemination areas. But we have other sources of data which are, building level or street level. For example, we have a data set of all the car crashes in the Montreal region. Those are specific points on the map, right? How do we let those points on the map kind of communicate and talk to data about neighborhoods? Which is kind of, so we've got, polygons, we've got points, we've got lines. And the exact same issues occur temporally, right? The census is gathered and released every 5 years, but other data sets are annual, other data sets are real time. How can we create a system that has the flexibility and kind of the power to let all these different types of data talk to each other in meaningful ways and provide really kind of trustworthy results? And, it's a rhetorical question, right? The answer is yes, we can, and we have done it. And I'm going to show you how it works now. So the SES approach to this, we start with, again, as the biggest possible embrace, every data set we can get our hands on. Just as a kind of as a preview, when I show the site in action, we're launching with a very small subset of the kind of the huge range of data sources that we're working with. And every month there's going to be new stuff hitting the site. So what we've got is a kind of you'll see that kind of vastness of data over time. But we're taking data from public sources, from private sources, machine generated, human gathered, you name it. And then we feed that into what we call our multi-scalar data architecture. So a system for reconciling these spatial temporal issues around different data sets, and so that they're kind of all speaking a common language, basically. And then really, I think probably the most exciting part of this whole thing is what comes next, which is that we have designed a whole system of rules for providing meaningful and kind of, like well-chosen visualizations, as well, in terms of graphs and maps, but also, English and French language contextualization, machine generated sentences, where we know, with different types of data, we can kind of, we can make good choices about how to display it to you. So as a very simple example of this, if you have a count of, say the average income per census tract in Montreal, and you also have a count of the percentage of people who drive to work every day. Those are both continuous quantitative variables. And if you kind of know your stats, you can make a scatter plot to show the relationship between those two variables. If one of them is qualitative, we need a different kind of method of showing them. So we have a whole system of these kinds of rules where whatever the input is, we're going to show you something good. And then the way we present it to you, and the way you're going to see it in a second when I show you, is through topic-specific custom modules. So the modules kind of are jargon for the kind of the slices of this huge set of data that we present on the website that are a little more focused on specific questions or specific issues that let you kind of explore, so you're not overwhelmed with 50,000 variables all in your face. We kind of, it's a little more curated than that. And as we develop the site already in the past, but also heading into the future, we can kind of go in either direction. So on the one hand, we have new data sets, kind of arrive. We can take those and we add them to our architecture. We figure out what new rules we might need to accommodate them, and then we design modules around that. Or maybe we start with the modules in the sense of we had someone say, we would really love to see something about physical fitness. What would it look like to design a new module that tackles that question? And we kind of work down to arrive at the data sets that we need. So, I like talking, but I think I've done enough of it for now. What I want to do is just, show you what this actually looks like, and kind of, again, take the ribbon off the package here. So I'm going to flip over. Our friends on Zoom will have to bear with me as I swap the screen sharing here. We're here. Okay, great. So let me just get rid of all the other stuff. Okay, great. Here it is, sus. This is the kind of internal version running on the computer. It's on the web. I'm going to give you the URL at the end of the session so we don't crash the website too early in this meeting. Here we are. We're in French right now. We're going to swap it over to English. This is a 100% bilingual site. You can do it in English or in French. Everything's exactly the same. There's a lot. There's a lot here. Just to be clear, I'm going to show you a couple of very narrow slices. You can explore it later in the hands-on or at home after the meeting. What I'm going to do is start with one topic here, which is active living potential. So this is a map showing active living potential across the Montreal region. And actually what's nice about this one is that this is a McGill developed data set, actually, which it's kind of similar to a walkability score, but it incorporates a number of different dimensions of the ability of the environment, of the kind of the neighborhood to support active living. And when we start, we see the kind of the distribution of active living potential at the borough and municipal scale. So we can kind of see across the Montreal region. It won't be too surprising. We've got higher potential for active living downtown and lower out in the suburbs and the region. We provide some kind of initial summary of the distribution of active living, both in terms of the graph here, as well as in some text. Again, that text is generated by computers in English or in French to give a good summary of what you're looking at a given moment. If we want, we can select, let's say, the borough of Ville-Marie. We see that Ville-Marie is, kind of off the charts here in terms of extremely high potential for active living, which isn't surprising. It's got tons of metro access. It's got very dense kind of walking oriented environments. And by contrast, we could look at in one of the municipalities off the island where that active living potential is a little lower. So when you load up the map at first, you're going to see the data organized at the kind of regional scale. But if you zoom into the map, we'll show you at a kind of a different scale kind of by default. So now we're looking at census tracts. We can go into dissemination areas, and you can fiddle with this yourself. So we can you can look at census tracts, or if you really want to go really micro, you can look at the buildings. And then in this case, we'll show you, you can kind of zoom in on and click on individual buildings. Now we don't have this data set for individual buildings. So instead, as we explain in the text that accompanies it, we'll tell you about the neighborhood around the building. But it's a nice way to visualize the data if you want to. So that's all pretty good, but where the real power of SUS comes in, as I described in the kind of overview, is in our ability to make different data sets talk to each other. And so I want to give you a couple quick examples of how that works, starting with, starting and ending with our compare panel up here, where we present a whole set of variables that, where you can kind of explore the relationship between active living potential and different features of urban life. And I'm going to start with one where the relationship, I think, is going to be pretty clear. So let me just zoom out here. So we'll look at this at the regional scale. So we're going to look at the relationship between active living potential and the number of people who drive to work every day, or the percentage of people who drive to work every day. So we zoom out, what we see is a very strong inverse relationship between these two things. So you can see on the graph here, it actually flags, it says strong correlation. It tells you, hey, there's a really strong pattern here. In brief, that pattern is neighborhoods with really high active living potential are neighborhoods where very few people drive to work. And neighborhoods where lots of people drive to work have very low active living potential. That's a good news story, right? It means that the places that support active living on the whole actually see active living. And on the map, you can see that the green areas are areas which are high just in active living potential. Blue is areas which are high just in the number of drivers. And then there are going to be a few places that are high in both, places where there's lots of active living and lots of driving. And what's interesting here is if we zoom into the census tract scale and kind of look at this neighborhood by neighborhood, what we see when we look at the map is there's actually only one single census tract in the entire Montreal region that has a really high potential for active living, but where everybody drives. And we can zoom in on that and see that it is right here in Westmount. So, for people who know Montreal, that isn't going to be a huge shock, right? But the idea is that we can see, at a glance with this map, we can see the kind of the overall patterns, which are very, very strong patterns. But also, where the outliers are, where the places that kind of fit the pattern, the places that don't. I can't spend too much time on this because we've got a million other things to look at, but just to give you one other example that would kind of, suggest some other kind of ideas, we can look at, the relationship between active living potential and income. So we can say, where are the places that are, that on the whole, is it true that active living potential is really mostly for people who are, quite high income or not? And actually the good news is, again, that there's a negative relationship here. On the whole, neighborhoods with lots of active living are neighborhoods with lower incomes, which is, good news in terms of people's ability to afford cars. But again, we can kind of explore what some of those outliers look like. Areas, for example, where we've got, where we've got low active living potential and low incomes. Those would be priority targets for, policy interventions, right, to improve the situation. So I can go on about this for like literally hours, but we don't have literally hours. So I want to flip over to another of our modules. This is in our ecology section. This is a look at natural infrastructure in the Montreal region. And while I chose this one, it's a very different type of data, and we can do something different with it, but also it comes from a different place. So this is through a partnership with Habitat, a consulting firm that Andy's involved with, that is a unique data set looking at all the kind of wooded areas in the Montreal region, and those areas are quantified in terms of their contribution to what we call ecosystem services. So biodiversity conservation, flood prevention, and heat island reduction. And now currently about 11% of the Montreal region, the CMM, is protected as natural infrastructure. The CMM has a target for 17%, so that's what we've got here on the slider. But actually, currently 25% of the region is actually natural infrastructure at this time. So this is a map showing now all of the natural infrastructure, the wooded natural infrastructure in the Montreal region. And what we can do with this module is, based on, first of all, kind of the default set of priorities, we can identify the areas which are more valuable to preserve in terms of their ecosystem contributions versus the areas which are less valuable. So yellow are really, really valuable, blue not so much. And we can move this slider and say, if we're only going to protect 20%, this is the most valuable 20. If we're only going to protect 5%, this is the most valuable 5. You can kind of play around with that. You can zoom in and kind of have a look at it. But I'm going to stay zoomed out just for the purpose of seeing the whole map. And that's already really cool. But what's really cool is that you can also set your own priorities. So if we click over here into custom priorities, what we now have is you can choose between these 3 dimensions of ecosystem services: biodiversity conservation, heat island reduction, and flood prevention. You can choose what's important to you and see the results for where should be the priority. So let's say we really want to emphasize flood prevention and we're not so concerned with the other ones. What we're going to see is a distribution of natural infrastructure to protect really concentrated along the water, right? No big surprise there, right? And meanwhile, if we flip over and say we're really interested in heat island reduction, we're going to see a very different arrangement of, a very different set of pixels on the map. And again, we can kind of, in any case, we can see more or less. There's way more in this module as well, but again, I'm conscious of the clock here, so I don't want to take up too much more time. But the idea here is that we've got a very different type of data, and we can do something very different with it, with a kind of consistent interface here. Now, I can show you many of these other modules, but one of the things is that most of the content we display, it's thematic. It takes a topic, in this case, natural infrastructure, and lets you explore that on a map. But sometimes you're not so interested in the topic, you're interested in the place, right? You want to know, how does my neighborhood stack up in sustainability across a range of different sustainability questions? Or, or maybe you just want to kind of explore different locations across Montreal. Well, we have, in fact, something called the Place Explorer, which lets us do that. So I'm going to flip over here to give you a very different type of content on SUS. Same data under the hood, but different rules, different ways for visualizing it. So now we've just got a kind of boring old map. We can type in a postcode, or you can click anywhere on the map. And let's click somewhere kind of near where we are here. When you click on a location, what you get is a kind of a real-time analysis of how that area stacks up against the rest of the Montreal region. So in this case, this is a comparison with the rest of the island. You can see the island or the region depending on what you want. You can choose which themes you're looking at. But in this case, we see for this dissemination area downtown, you can see kind of how it ranks across a range of different important sustainability indicators. So looking good on sustainable transport, looking pretty bad on road collisions, not very good on air pollution, et cetera, right? So you get this quick kind of at a glance look, and you can change the scale you're looking at. So if you want to say, actually, I'm really interested in my borough here, you swap the slider. Now we're looking at Ville-Marie as it compares with all the other boroughs and all the other municipalities in the Montreal region. That's cool. What we also do, if you really want to dive deep into this particular neighborhood, is you kind of scroll down, and we'll throw a huge amount of data at you that we organize in terms of what makes this area unique, and then what makes this area similar to others. So we have a range of different variables. To give you an example here, the kind of household composition of Ville-Marie really stands out. It's got way more people living alone. And I appreciate this text is probably invisible for the in-person audience. But Ville-Marie is way off the charts in terms of the number of people living alone, and likewise has very few families with children. So that it really stands out compared to the rest of the city, right? And then you can see areas where it's not so uncommon. So for example, its education profile is very similar to the rest of the region. So the idea, and this is all generated, dynamically in response to where you're interested in. But the notion is that this gives you a kind of place-based, huge set of data sources we have available. We're going to wrap up now and do that with just a couple of brief next steps I want to describe to you. So first of all, this has already come up in some of the Q&A, but I just want to be clear about what our roadmap looks like for the future. This is what we're launching with right now. So let me get a couple of these things off the screen. For the launch, and again, the site is live, and we're going to give you the link in a second. We really concentrate on making sure that the underlying systems are stable and reliable. So that means that getting this kind of multi-scalar data architecture, which lets different data sources speak to each other, having a system for displaying all this information really fast and really responsively, which is a pretty hard challenge, but also getting all that kind of additional explanation and visualization dialed in, including bilingually being able to generate on the fly kind of sentences describing and summarizing data sets of what you're looking at, in English or in French, in situations that we will have never seen before. It's all about, when you click what you get. And our kind of big, the feature that we developed recently that we're really excited about is this Place Explorer that lets you look at a location in Montreal and kind of explore a whole different set of sustainability issues there. But we do have a ton of stuff coming in the next couple months. So first of all, many more modules. I really what you're seeing right now is truly the tip of the iceberg. We have a really exciting range of different modules tackling a whole set of different sustainability questions across the Montreal region. And basically, first day of every month, you're going to see new content on the site for, probably as I don't know when it's going to stop, but not anytime soon. We got a huge set of things coming. We're also going to be developing, and this also speaks to the question about kind of public communication, a set of topic hubs and issue spotlights. So when there's a sustainability related issue in the news, and we've got some data that could speak to it, we're going to put that forward. There's going to be a blog portion of the site and kind of news portion where we in some cases it's new content, but a lot of the times we've got it. It's just a question of if suddenly this is timely, we'll throw the analysis up there and say, hey, there was a heat wave. Here's how heat risk is distributed, demographically, say across, in Montreal. Like we'll be able to kind of do that type of analysis. This already came up in the Q&A, but I'll reiterate that we were very close to kind of flipping the public switch on our data export and data transparency, which will let understand the data sets you're looking at and where it's feasible based on kind of data usage agreements, those kind of contracts. If it's publicly accessible information, we'll let you download it. So whatever you're seeing on the screen, you can go and play with yourself. And then lastly, and again, this also came up in the Q&A, but I really want to reiterate it because it's so exciting, a sus for every city. So maybe not every city at first, but we are, we've designed the platform from the ground up to travel. And we've already got some very exciting plans in the works for that. So over the next year or so, I think you should expect to see a lot more news about sus in Montreal and elsewhere. And that's going to be very exciting. So to conclude, we'd love for you to stay in touch. If you are here, it means you gave us an email address. We're going to send you a message next week inviting you to join our mailing list, which will be kind of once a month updates about what's happening on the platform. The code to build this site is open source, and we've got a, we welcome collaborators on some of the kind of underlying infrastructure if you're so inclined, and then we'd also welcome all sorts of other different kinds of collaborations because we've, whether it's organizations, it's municipalities, there's a lot here to do, and as I mentioned before, a ton of what you're currently seeing is really about the kind of specific interests of the people who've been running this project so far. But my guess, pretty strong guess, is that there are a lot of other interests that we would be able to to kind of speak to if the right partnerships are there. So here's the site. It's susmontreal.ca. We are rated for like 120 simultaneous visits. So if you're born on an odd day of the month, visit it now. And if you're born on an even day of the month, try this afternoon. Hopefully it holds up. But launch day is of course always going to be the most stressful. So as soon as we finish the presentation, I'm going to be furiously monitoring the traffic. But anyway, yeah, the site is live. It's going to be updated, like I said, every month with new content. We're super excited about this. And with that, we'd like to say thank you very much for coming.